I was struck by one thing you said about how enslaved people are like always kind of perpetually in the state of grief, state of. And I think one of the things I learned when writing my book that I didn't fully understand until the sort of research process was just the ongoing, perpetual, like unceasing sense of precarity, right? That like your presence at any given place, your life, your relationship to another person is so fragile. I think I knew it. Like I knew like, oh, people are, sold away, people die, people, but I didn't for some reason, I didn't fully appreciate how like for every enslaved person, there was this sense that at any moment, like the person you love could be sold away, your child, your husband, your wife, your mother, your father. And, I always try to do these sort of like empathic historical exercises, try to make myself more proximate to history in whatever I'm writing about. And when you think about it in the context of enslavement, when I'm just like, I think about my family, the four of us, and like waking up one day and my children are gone. I don't know where they went. I don't know who took them. I don't know if I will ever see them again. It's so viscerally, I mean, I don't want to say it's unfathomable because it happened. And in different contexts, it still happens in different sort of geopolitical contexts today. But the idea that you could be stripped away from the people you love, that your own life could be stripped away from you. It like I remember when I was a kid, and I think like many of my students, I used to teach high school. And when we read Toni Morrison and talked about slavery, it would always be like, why didn't they just run away? Like, feel like, Smith, nobody would ever do that to me. Like, I would run away. I'll beat them up. Like, I fight them. I punch the dog. Like, all that. I'm like, all right, cool. But I didn't understand the way that even if you were able to escape, that you were, it was virtually impossible to escape with children, right? So like just children were incapable of making the journey from especially the deep south, like even Maryland, used to try and go from Maryland to New York, that it was so difficult to make that journey and so dangerous for kids, that it was in some ways just like a suicide mission, and that it was hard to make it with big groups of people. It was hard to, and so then you have these folks who are in this position where like, even if you are physically able to leave, and even if you are able to make your way through the swamp, make your way, traveling at night and not die from disease, or die from bears or wolves or snake catchers, that you have to accept that you either have to choose to try to do it with your family, which makes it more unlikely that you will make it, that you will, if you do then, or if you do it, you have to leave your family behind. And even if you are successful in doing it, even if you travel from Georgia to Canada and make it by yourself, and that's a decision you have made, that your family back at the plantation will be punished for what you've done, right? And for some reason, I just didn't understand that. And so the sort of, we kind of talked about like this sense of paralysis. Like I feel like there was a sense of paralysis that existed for enslaved folks, because you felt stuck, right? Like you're like, running away is not just a question of like, am I physically capable of doing it? I'm brave enough. It's like, what is the sort of ethical and human calculus of what I'm going to do? And even if it's not your family, even if your family, like that, there will be people who will be punished on your behalf. And it just, and to go back to what we were saying before, like I think there is like an unspoken grief in that, the sort of the grieving of the impossibility of choices, that like any choice you make to go or to stay is one that is laden with consequences
Right.
for you, for the people you love.
Right.
And I think that that's what slavery was,
Right.
like this series of impossible choices.
Right.
And I think that that's what so many iterations of Black life throughout history, the history of this country have been. It is like the impossibility of being presented with a series of impossible choices and having to decide like what's the best one,
Right.
and then making a decision and not knowing if
Right.
it was the best one.
Right. Right. I think it, like, I think that, like, thinking about that, like a series of impossible, or you know, that multitude of impossible choices, and like thinking about, you know, that idea, you know, that they're like constantly sort of struggling with different kinds of grief, right? I think that changed my understanding of resistance, because I think before I began to research Let Us Descend, I thought, you know, I thought like your high school kids, right? I was like, oh, you know, like resistance was about running away, or uprisings, right? And that was it. Like that was those are my ideas about resistance, right? And I think that maybe part of the reason that, you know, that we do face some resistance, you know, I think within the Black community when it comes to work, you know, like ours, right? You know, that wrestles with chattel slavery, is because I think people are coming to it with those ideas in their head, right? That, well, they weren't resisting, right? And why did they accept this, right? I wouldn't accept this, right?
It's like a shame.
Right, there's a shame in that, right? And when I was, you know, researching American chattel slavery and thinking about grief and thinking about, you know, like how enslaved people were even just in like the fact that they like woke up in the morning and got up out of bed, right? And that more of them did not make the decision not to, you know, and unalive themselves. Like it just made me think that everything was an act of resistance, right? Like choosing to live and to get up in the morning and to breathe and to do these things in your day that would keep you sort of safe, right? Or that would, you know, make it possible for you to continue to breathe, and then sleeping and then getting up the next day and doing it again. Like, I don't know, for me, it then meant that I looked at the entire lives of enslaved people, and I thought their whole lives were an act of resistance, right? Because they're making that choice over and over again to exist in the face of, you know, of monstrous, inhumane, you know, violence.